My name is Shaunique, and I'm a member of the Wolf Clan from the Clogadena people of the Tahltan Nation, northwestern British Columbia. I'm a former chief, and my name is Jerry Asp, and I'm also past president of the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation, the economic arm for the Tahltan people. You know, Indigenous people are the most modern, marginalized people on the planet, yet they're the ones that are always closest to the resource development. That's been my background. That's what we do, the Tahltan Nation. We live in a very resource-rich area, yet our people were being left out. Resource developers and people who are not Indigenous think Native people only know how to do fancy beadwork and carve totem poles. That's not true. So one of my biggest jobs, my biggest hurdle was to break those stereotypes. Our vision was to eradicate unemployment and bring pride back to our people so they're earning a living and they're not living on welfare. One of our best joint venture companies that we started was called ResCan Tahltan Environmental Consulting. And we have a beautiful logo. I think it's one of the best logos the Tahltans have. But embossed on that logo are the words, keepers of the land. Tahltans actually believe we're keepers of the land. We actually believe that we are responsible for the fish. We actually believe we're responsible for the moose, and we're responsible for the caribou. We're responsible for the grizzly and for the mouse. I'm a Tahltan first and a businessman second. We have what's called traditional ecological knowledge. And by using that traditional ecological knowledge, if we have to build a road, I can tell them exactly where that road should not go. I can tell them exactly where that road should go to do the least ecological damage to wildlife or migration paths. And that knowledge to me is very important. Indigenous people are the same world over. It doesn't matter whether I'm in Peru or whether I'm in Belize or whether I'm in Ontario. The resources are there for the people, but they're marginalized. My story is to tell people and show them what's possible. This is what the Tahltans did, and I say point blank, if the Tahltans can do it, any Indigenous community can do it. You know, one of the things that's great in Aboriginal communities, if you want to do business with us, is trust. Listen to what we have to say. Everybody's heard the story that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. We believe that you should teach him to catch 2 fish, eat the first one and market the second one to get the amenities of life that everybody else enjoys. The priest and the RCMP and the government agent were the ones who were making decisions for us as though we were children. And they did that to the men. We made a decision that we're not going to live under the oppression of the government anymore, and we were going to be rulers and stop being beggars in our own land. If you want to do business in Tahltan land, you talk to Tahltan people, or you won't be doing business there. The Global Indigenous Development Trust that I work with, our whole goal is to give people opportunities to be decision makers in their own land again.
And since then, we've met with hundreds of communities across Latin America. Jerry's visited Scandinavia, and we've been invited to Indonesia and across Africa to share the Canadian experience and models for transforming Indigenous economies. Indigenous communities are not necessarily against development. I mean, you know, again, development means something different to everybody, and so we have to look at it in that context. But Indigenous communities simply want to be authors of what that looks like. They want to be part of the discussion. And what you're seeing today in a lot of scenarios, particularly around resource development in the world, is Indigenous communities taking some of that control and that power back. It's having the Indigenous voice at the table. How do we include that perspective at the table, and not only in the decisions that are affecting them on their own lands, like we're seeing today around the world, you know, with pipelines and with energy projects, but also in our own society as a whole. I mean, you know, in terms of our discussions on what our society should look like, how we manage climate change impacts, how we manage our relationship with our environment and how we drive our own economic development going forward. One of the biggest challenges we saw right away working in Latin America is the massive amount of conflict. And right now, economic growth is pushing resource developers further and further into remote territories, into more fragile ecosystems, and they're coming face to face with Indigenous people. So like Jerry said, where there are resources, there are Indigenous people. So a lot of the work we're trying to do right now is to develop models in different places of the world outside of Canada to show, in fact, what's possible. We at Indigenous Trust have spent the last 2 years trying to bring Indigenous perspectives into resource development. We need your help today to help grow this impact and help bring the Indigenous voices to development around the world.
I'm a great fan of Will Rogers, the Native American philosopher. He says, you have to learn from other people's mistakes because you don't live long enough to make them all yourself. So hopefully I can show others some of the mistakes I made and they can avoid them.
What is most shocking is that development continues to happen around the world on Indigenous lands without Indigenous participation.
So we need you to help spread our message. We're not just trying to start a not-for-profit, we're trying to start a movement across the world. A movement that's empowered Indigenous communities and changed the way that resource development is done everywhere. We want to become the standard, not the exception to the rule. We want to become the norm.
What I have learned is that we have so much to learn. And as our Prime Minister has said, we don't have a lot of time to learn it. And so these are communities that we have a lot to learn from. And if we would just stop and listen, I think we could all value and benefit from all the knowledge that there is to share.